she was alive. The Duke of Brackenhall stood frozen in the low doorway of a village cottage with the reins still on his shoulders, and he could not move, could not speak, because the woman bent over her needlework by the small window, the woman he had mourned for 4 long years, had stood at an empty grave for, had given up the better half of himself, had lifted her head at the creak of the door, and it was Amelia. It was Amelia Rook, older, thinner, her hair drawn back plain and a thimble on her finger, and a length of grey wool across her knee. But it was her face, the face he had carried through 4 years of darkness, and it was looking at him now as though he were the ghost, and not she. The needle slipped from her fingers and did not fall, caught by the thread. Neither of them breathed. He had come to this village by accident, or what passed for accident. His steward had sent him to inspect a parcel of land on the far edge of the estate, and the storm had driven him to shelter, and the first lit window he had seen belonged to the village seamstress, and he had ducked under the low lintel out of the rain, expecting nothing, expecting an old woman with pins in her mouth. He had not expected the dead to look up at him with grey eyes he knew better than his own. "Niall," she whispered. His name in her mouth undid 4 years in an instant. He had been the Duke of Brackenhall to everyone living for so long that the sound of his own Christian name, in that voice, struck him like a blow. "They told me you were dead," he said. His own voice sounded strange to him, rough and far away. "There was a fever in the spring you went away. Your family, your cousin wrote to me. There was a grave. Amelia, I stood at a grave." "I know." She set the wool aside with hands that were not steady. "I know what they told you. They told me a great deal too." She rose from her chair, and he saw that she steadied herself against the table to do it, as though her legs were not certain of her. "They told you I was dead, and they told me you had married. They were very thorough of my family. They did not want a duke's heir tangling himself with a baronet's penniless daughter, and when persuasion failed they used the surer methods. A false letter, a false grave, a new name in a far county. I have been Mrs. Rook, a widow, these 4 years, in a village I had never seen, sewing other women's gowns." Niall took 1 step into the room. The rain dripped from him onto the swept floor. "I never married," he said. "There has not been an hour in 4 years I did not, Amelia. I never married. I could not. I went on as a man goes on who has had the heart taken out of him, and I let them call it grief and dignity, and all the while He stopped. His throat had closed. "I mourned you. Every day I mourn you still. I do not know how to stop, even now, with you standing before me." She put her hand to her mouth. And then, from the shadowed corner behind her skirts, by the hearth where a small fire burned low against the wet day, something stirred. A small movement, half hidden. A little hand came out and caught a fold of her plain grey skirt, and held to it, the way small hands hold to the one safe thing in a room full of storms and strangers. Niall went very still. He could not see the whole of the small figure. The fall of Amelia's skirts and the dimness of the corner hid most of it, only that hand, fast in the wool, and when Amelia drew a breath and shifted, a glimpse of dark hair and a pair of solemn eyes lifted to look at the tall, wet stranger in the doorway. Dark eyes, dark, intent, watchful eyes, set in a small, grave face, fixed on him with a steadiness that no one had any business possessing so young. He knew those eyes. He had shaved before them every morning of his life. He had seen them look back at him from his father's portrait, and his grandfather's, the whole dark Brackenhall line of them hung along the gallery at home. The breath went out of him as though he had been struck. "Amelia," he said, and could say nothing else. She had gone white. She moved, instinctively, to put herself a little between him and the corner, one hand going back to rest upon the dark head, and the gesture told him everything that her face was too frightened to say. "I did not know," she said in a rush, low and unsteady, "when they sent me away. I did not know until I was a month in this village with no way to reach you in a false grave with my name on it standing between us." And by then what was I to do? Write to a duke I believed had married another, and tell him I had nothing. I had a needle and a borrowed name and one small reason to keep my head up and go on living when I should very much have liked to lie down and not. So I sewed, and I went on. And I never once let myself imagine you might walk through that door, because the imagining was more than I could bear. The small hand tightened in her skirt. The dark eyes had not left Niall's face. He found he had crossed the room without knowing he had moved. He stopped a careful pace away, close enough to see the small one whole now, half behind her, a sturdy little figure in a coat she had plainly cut down and sewn from something larger, the stitches at the hem very fine, finer than the cloth deserved. He knew that hand at sewing. He had watched it once years ago, in a window seat at a summer house, drawing a thread through linen while he pretended to read and watched her instead. 4 years, he said. His voice broke on it. 4 years I have lived in a great cold house and called myself a man who had lost everything, and the whole time you were 2 days' ride away, sewing in a cottage with, he could not finish. He looked down at the small grave face turned up to his. With our. He stopped again. He did not say the word. He found there was no need of words at all. He went down, slowly, onto one knee on the swept earth floor, his fine wet coat pooling around him, so that his face was level with the small one's, and he said, very gently, in a voice he had not used in 4 years and had thought he had forgotten, "Hello." The small figure considered him with that grave Brackenhall steadiness, and did not let go of Amelia's skirt, and after a long moment said nothing at all, only kept looking, as though committing his face to memory the way Amelia had once told him she did, the way one looks at a thing one means never to lose again. Niall's eyes burned. He did not trust himself to speak. He stayed there on one knee level with that small solemn gaze, until the little hand at last loosed its grip on the grey wool by a single cautious finger and reached out and touched the wet braid at the shoulder of his coat, with the frank curiosity of the very young, who do not yet know that dukes are to be feared. Above them, Amelia made a sound that was half a sob and pressed both hands over her mouth. He stayed in the village 3 days. He sent his man back with a letter to the steward and a great many instructions and no explanations at all, and he took a room at the indifferent inn. And he came to the seamstress' cottage each morning with the dawn and stayed until the small one slept. He did not rush her. He had learned, in 4 years of grief, the cost of things done in haste and the cost of things not done at all, and he meant to make neither mistake again. He learned the shape of the life she had built. It was a small, hard, honest life, and she had built it with her 2 hands out of nothing, and the dignity of it humbled him. The women of the village brought her their mending and their daughters' wedding clothes and paid her in coin and kindness, and she had never once written to her family, who believed her safely buried, nor to him. She had a single good gown kept for church and a row of pins on a strip of felt, and a wooden box of threads sorted by colour, and she had the small one, who was named, she told him this on the 2nd evening, by the low fire, after the little figure had at last fallen asleep against her shoulder, for his mother. She had given the dead Duchess's name to the small one. She had not been able to give Niall anything else, so she had given that. He had to leave the cottage and stand a while in the cold yard before he could come back in with a steady face. "You should hate me," she said quietly when he returned. The small one slept on, dark lashes against a flushed cheek, one fist curled in the grey wool of her bodice. "You will hate me when the first wonder of it passes. I let you mourn. I let you believe a grave. I did not move heaven and earth to reach you, as a braver woman would have." "A braver woman," said Niall, "would not have done one whit more than you have done. You kept this small life safe and warm and fed on a needle and a false name with no one in the world to help you, and you did it without complaint or appeal, and you raised," his voice caught, "you raised something good and brave in a cottage that would fit 12 times into my hall. I do not see a coward, Amelia. I have spent my life among the great and the titled, and I have never once seen courage until I walked into this room out of the rain." He knelt again beside her chair and took her free hand, the one with the thimble still upon the finger, and pressed it to his mouth. "I am only sorry it took a storm to drive me here. I am sorry for every day. I will spend the rest of my life being sorry and making it right, if you will let me." She wept then, silently, so as not to wake the small one, and he held her hand against his face and let her, and outside the rain came on again, soft now, no longer a storm. He brought them to Brackenhall in the dry days that followed, in his own carriage, and the great cold house was not cold for long. There was talk, of course. There was always talk. A duke who had mourned a dead love for 4 years did not produce her, living from a village cottage, along with a small dark-eyed figure of an age that set the drawing-rooms counting on their fingers, without setting every tongue in the county wagging. Niall met the talk the way he met everything now, head up, plain, without apology. He did not hide her. He did not invent a softer story. He brought Amelia Rook into his hall on his arm, and presented her to his household as the woman he had loved before he had had a title, and meant to marry the moment the banns could be read, and the small one he presented as his own, and dared the world, with one cold sweep of his dark Brackenhall eyes, to say a single word. The world on the whole did not dare. Brackenhall was feared. He had never before been glad of it. He found, now, that there was a use for being feared, and it was this, that a man so feared might gather the 2 people he loved best inside the circle of his protection, and let the talk break against it like rain against a window, and never reach them at all. He married her in the small estate chapel, with the morning light coming in coloured through the old glass, and only the household to witness it, because Amelia wanted nothing grand, and he found he wanted only her. She wore the single good gown she had kept for church, and he had it not the least in his heart to wish it finer. He had seen her make beauty out of cut-down coats and grey wool, and the gown she had chosen for herself was the loveliest thing in England to him. The small one stood between them at the altar rail, very solemn in new clothes, holding to Amelia's skirt with one hand and, after a while, reaching up to hold to the hem of Niall's coat with the other, bridging them, fastening them a small living seam. Niall looked down at that small hand fast in his coat, and something that had been broken in him for 4 years knit quietly closed. In the years that came, and there were many of them, long and full, he never lost the habit of stopping in doorways. He would come in from the fields or the road or the long business of the estate, and pause on the threshold of whatever room held them, and let himself feel again, every time, the same disbelieving rush he had felt in the cottage out of the rain, that she was alive, that they were his, that the great house was warm. He told her so on a winter evening years on, the 2 of them by the fire in the long gallery where his dark-eyed forebears hung, while a small figure, taller now, sat on the hearthrug below them building something out of wooden blocks with the grave Brackenhall concentration that had never left those eyes. Amelia sat with her needlework, the old thimble on her finger. She had never given it up, though she had 1,000 finer now, because it had carried her through, and Niall would not have let her give it up for the world. "I stood at a grave with your name on it," he said, low, watching the firelight on her bent head. "I thought I had buried everything a man could lose. And here you sit, mending my cuff with the same thimble, and there on the rug is the best of us both, and I am the most fortunate man in England, and I did nothing to deserve it but walking out of the rain." She set down her sewing and looked at him, her grey eyes bright in the firelight, older now, dearer now, and she said, "You came in out of the rain, Niall. That is all I ever asked of the world, that one day the right door would open." She reached across and laid her hand, thimble, over his. "And you knew us. That is the whole of the miracle. 4 years, and a false grave between us, and you stood in that doorway and you knew us at once." "I should know you across 400 years, said the Duke of Brackenhall, and lifted her hand, thimble and all, to his lips, "and I shall keep on knowing you, and that small reason you kept your head up for, every day I am given, for I have learned the worth of an open door, and I mean never again to mourn what was warm and living and 2 days' ride away. You are home. You were always home. I am only glad I was not too late to find my way to it. Below them on the hearthrug, the small dark-eyed figure looked up from the wooden blocks at the two of them by the fire, and seeing them, so, the Duke's head to the seamstress's hand, the firelight warm on both, went back, to build in the deep, settled certainty of the very young that this was simply how the world was, and always had been, and always would be, warm and safe, and theirs.